Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia, and welcome back to Evolve Ventures with Emilia, also known as EVE, where we go into the depths of human psychology, neuroscience, and today, one of my favorite topics, emotional safety. Most people think that emotional safety means feeling safe with someone else. But the key critical component that we're going to delve into today at more of a hot tempo than other episodes is the reality that emotional safety actually starts with the relationship that you have to yourself, not with other people. So I have a concept that I want to bring in today's episode. And the realities are in this emotional safety category, concept, bucket, there's a lot in here, but I want to make sure that from our last video where we talked about relationships revealing the patterns, we delve slightly deeper into the core components, the foundations that allow those patterns to surface, because this is where that becomes even clearer. Underneath those patterns that we see and that relationships reveal is a deeper question. Do I feel safe being myself? And yes, that is the whole spectrum, the whole version of yourself. And truly, where do you feel safe being yourself? When does that safety begin? And when does it end, if at all? Not performing, not managing how you're being perceived, not trying to get it right, but actually being yourself. So I have a couple of stories that are swarming to get the microphone for this episode. And my goodness, if I could share all of the stories that are in my head about this one, I think we'd be here for way longer than the time that we have slotted. But one story really sticks out deeply to me as I think about the topic of emotional safety. Because for me, when I go back on this specific memory, it reminds me of the version of myself that didn't really understand conceptually nor in a practical matter how important emotional safety was. And in that situation, I just so happened to be in a date with the now love of my life. And so much before that date, I was rehearsing kind of what I was going to be saying, how I would be coming across, what I should say, what I shouldn't say. And prior to a date or prior to something really important to us, I know so many of us can fall into that trap. And when it actually came to the date, I remembered one moment at the very beginning where a part of me was tracking what I should say, what I shouldn't say, monitoring whether or not I was being understood by the man on the other side. And underneath all of that was this quiet sense that I wasn't fully safe to be just as I was. But then something really started to switch within inside me because I made a decision for myself prior to going into that date. I'm kind of done playing the charades. I'm done playing the quote unquote game. I'm not going to show up as much or in the way in which I had in former dates. And for me, that little moment, a couple minutes into our date, what I noticed is nothing really was wrong and it wasn't super obvious. And he, of course, did nothing to make this happen. It was ultimately the energy that I was presenting, the energy, the pattern that I put myself in because my system had learned when you go into a date, when it's your first date, to stay slightly guarded and moreover, not to go deep quickly. And so if you've ever been in that situation where whether it be a date or you're meeting someone new, there's this little part of you that is monitoring how you interact, is monitoring how you're coming off or how you're being perceived. You have fallen trap into this pattern of ultimately what your system has learned to do over the span of your life. And that is ultimately this commonality that we all share when it comes to emotional safety. What I started to understand in that moment, that emotional safety truly just isn't about the other person. More often than not, it's actually about whether your system believes it is safe to exist without managing yourself. So picture that date. I'm there in that moment where quite literally I am like with the love of my life and I don't realize it, but it's coming into this whole moment of like, holy crap, this is the guy. And the patterns that I was used to for emotional safety were like, we need to be in this small little box, stay on the surface. But this is where we want to define emotional safety for us, because emotional safety, what it looks like versus what it feels like, is quite different. Because what it looks like can be slightly different, but what it feels like is very much the same. What emotional safety is the ability to stay present, even when something is uncomfortable, even when, in my case, the love of your life is on the other side of the table and there's a lot there. Being able to express yourself without fear of losing that connection, not necessarily to the other person, but to your truest version of yourself, and being able to remain that connectedness, that sense of connection to yourself while you're with someone else. And that's critical, because when your nervous system, it doesn't feel safe, you don't just react. You start shifting into all of these patterns of who you think you're meant to be, right? That's the chameleon version of what we've likely heard. You become maybe more agreeable, more quiet, more intense, more distance, depending on who your system has learned to have to be. Not because that's who you are, but because that's what helped you stay safe in the worlds that you existed in. So what a lot of people call personality is actually just protection. And the reality that slapped me with in that moment of our date was, okay, we cannot be operating the same way here as we might be comfortable operating. And there's been many different times that that's happened. And the more that we have to protect ourselves, the less that we feel ourselves. So it's this kind of catch-22. So if you've ever really felt this way, where you, depending on who you're with, you feel as though your nervous system is having to shift or abandon or discard who you really are, you leave interactions feeling drained or slightly off, or kind of having to climb back to the version of yourself that you know yourself to be. This is usually why, because there's not this emotional safety. It's not been cultivated consciously within. And so the key component in here that I want everyone to claim out of this specific video is that emotional safety actually allows identity to stabilize. It's that foundation, that core true version of ourselves that we move from and return back to. And over time, we do this not in a rigid way, but where you don't have to keep adjusting in order to feel okay. So picture a boat that is moored or has an anchor. Well, some of the tides might shift you around. That anchor is really dug down deep, and that represents your true self. So while you might slightly adjust, you know who you are. And just like we talked about in the last video, this comes back to your nervous system, because when your nervous system feels safe, you don't have to become anyone else in order to stay connected. And so this is what ultimately changes relationships, that deep connection to yourself, not finding this perfect person, or not finding the perfect set of conditions where you can feel safe to be yourself, but rather becoming someone who learns how to stay within themselves, their deepest true parts of themselves, just like I had to in that date. Quite literally, it felt like shifting gears from emotional performance to emotional safety. And you do this while being with someone else. So safety at the end of the day, emotional safety, it doesn't mean nothing ever feels uncomfortable. Quite the contrary. Because your nervous system has learned protection and performance to stay safe, quite literally, it means that you don't have to abandon yourself anymore when it does. When it feels unsafe or when it feels uncomfortable, instead, you return to yourself, rather abandon yourself. So for anyone that's out there and felt this, emotional safety, it's not easy to cultivate. But when you do so again and again, and you show up again and again, not abandoning yourself in moments that are important, where there's discomfort, when it really matters to you, you do not need to earn safety, but rather what the core component here is, you need to learn how to experience safety while with others. Because this is a constant part of the journey that I notice. Most people, they don't feel emotional safety with other people, but yet they're not claiming what they need to do within themselves to stay with themselves while with others. So I'm going to ask my awesome post-production team to flash a visual on the screen that is the ladder of emotional safety. And at the top, you'll notice there's this surface level preferences that for most of us, we feel comfortable talking about, right? And that emotional safety is good. But as we start to kind of go down the ladder, there's different elements of emotional safety that we might feel it's okay to go into. So on that date, in closing today, for the time that I have here, that date, what normally would have stayed on just the surface, sharing preferences, really not exposing or sharing any element of my true self, I went very deep, as did he, down to the bottom rungs where you'll see there's mortality discussed, legacy, trauma, shame. Now, I'm not suggesting you do this on your first date, but it begs the question, when we do go down the ladder and as we do navigate what it means for us to no longer abandon ourselves and to deepen our sense of attunement and connection to ourselves while in the presence of others, it begs the question, at least for me, what is possible for you? And so if you liked this episode and you want more, trust me, there's so much underneath this that I wish I could share. This is where EVE Reflections, down in the show notes, click that link. You'll get more practical applications for emotional safety in your life. And if you struggle abandoning yourself, you struggle feeling connected and with yourself while with others, trust me, you're going to want to hear more about this specific topic. And there's going to be many other topics that are related to this that I'll help you cultivate in your life. So as always, keep evolving. I am here always as your guide, but emotional safety, let's sink into what that means for us, what it can mean at this point in our journey, and where our next rung on the ladder is for us to sink deeper into ourselves. With that said, I'm so excited to see you in the next episode, and I hope that just today, it increased your probability of emotional safety. Be well.